Welcome to the second video of 6 in our series on non-contact doubling cube decisions. This video will focus on the 8-9-12 rule. We will also offer an alternative to traditional division as we try to simplify and reduce the math and calculations. And we will finish with a few observations that will reveal some shortcuts. The 8-9-12 rule states that our cubing window for cash games is an 8 to 12% race lead, and our recubing window is a 9 to 12% race lead. So what we're saying is, when we have a race lead less than 8%, it's not a double. When we have a race lead between 8 and 12%, it's a double take, and when that race lead is higher than 12%, we have a double pass, with the addition of the 9%, where we are looking for a higher threshold to recube. As cubing our opponent, we're giving our opponent the cube, and the cube does have some value. So when the cube is already in play and we're about to recube to 4, we're looking for a higher threshold of 9% to recube. That's the 8-9-12 rule. And what the challenge is for new players is the quick and easy conversion of a race lead to a race lead percentage. So we have a position, we've counted our pips, we have a race lead. We have a race lead of 7 pips. We're thinking about cubing, but we want a more accurate answer than just guessing. So now we have to convert our 7 pip race lead into a percentage, and this requires a little bit of work. And the purpose of this video is to demonstrate not only the 8-9-12 rule, but to throw in some tricks, my technique of eliminating almost all the math. Before we dive in, a quick reminder that the 8-9-12 rule, the keys count, and other tools that we have are not 100% accurate. We also have to remember that an estimate is often good enough and can save us a lot of time. So for example, we have a position, we've determined we have a race lead, we've counted our pips, and we're starting to convert our pip lead into a pip lead percentage. And as we do this, we start to see that it's going to land right around 6%. We don't have to go any further. This is so far from our threshold of 8%. It's an easy no double. We can roll the dice and keep playing, and then reevaluate on our next roll. And again, if we are in a position and we start to calculate our race lead percentage, converting our pip lead into a percentage, and we see it's going to be close to 10%, which is also our Super 10 shortcut from our previous video. As soon as we see we're well within the middle of this range, it should be an easy double take. We don't need that much of an answer. And if once we get past 13, 14, 15%, we can see that it's an easy double, and if the cube is being thrown at us, we can see we have a very easy pass. Once our estimate shows us we're well beyond that threshold, that estimate's good enough to make a decision. And I'm going to show you one more position to talk about how accurate the 8-9-12 rule is. Let's take a quick look at this example. We've counted our race here in this position. We determined that we have a race lead, and we're considering the cube. Now I'll get right to the answer because we're going to use our time more wisely on our actual technique, but this is just to demonstrate something. Our pip count is 45, our opponent's pip count is 49. We have a 4 pip race lead, and when we convert that to a percentage, we have an 8.9% race lead. Now, 8%, 8.9, it's very close to 9, so we're right there. So this should be easily a double take. We're well within our window of our double take, and we're at the start of our window of our redouble take. So this should be a double take, and this should be perfectly fine to redouble take. When you're this close, you're playing, having fun, just throw the cube, give your opponent a hard time, and see who wins. But you should be within your error range. Now the actual answer to this position is, for the initial cube, our range of 8 to 12%, it's a 0. And an easy take for our opponent. This is a borderline double. This is actually here. Nowhere close to 9. Now this is because we have these overstacks and we have only 2 checkers here. Our position would be much better if it looked like this. And these stacks, these gaps, are going to be the subject of our 3rd video in this series. However, this turns out to not be an easy cube. It turns out to be a borderline cube. And the recube, we thought we were here right on the edge of the recube. It's actually minus 48. With 80 being our threshold, we're more than halfway to blunder if the cube was already in play and we recubed our opponent. So this is not a recube. It's not close. And the 8, 9, 12 rule, you might say, has failed us because it's giving us an okay answer on this side and an incorrect answer, close to an incorrect answer, for our redouble. But the point I'm trying to make here is not that the 8, 9, 12 rule can at times be wrong, but we're looking for an estimate, and we're going to learn how to make adjustments for these stacks. But don't get hung up too much on how accurate your answer is going to be, because there are some positional factors that you do have to weigh in when you're looking at your position. But do remember that having a method like this is exponentially better than what you're doing when you're first learning this game. Whether you admit it or not, all you're doing is guessing. So let's get started on our Pip lead to Pip lead percentage conversions. The 8, 9, 12 rule is based off of percentage. We take our race lead and divide it by our pip count, and that gives us our race lead percentage. And this is always done from the point of view of the person who's cubing. It's the cuber's race lead divided by the cuber's pip count, and at that point you'll see that the opponent's pip count is no longer a factor. So for the rest of this video, it's always be done from our point of view, that we were looking at cubing our opponent. So we're going to do one full example of what some people will call the traditional way of doing it, the difficult way. I call it the horrible way. Jake, what do you think? Are you ready? Okay, Jake is ready. He doesn't look happy, but he is ready. So we have our position. Do a quick pip count here. 56 plus 3 is 59. So you have a pip count of 59. Your opponent, 50, 60, 65, and 1 is 66. So your opponent's pip count is 66. So your pip lead here is 7 pips. That gives us our 2 numbers that we need. So this is a traditional way of doing it. Our pip lead divided by our pip count. Our lead, our count. So let's do this. 7, and we divide it by 59. Easy, right? So 59 into 70, we can do that once. And that gives us what? That gives us 11. Bring down a 0, 59 goes into 110 once. 59, now we have to subtract these 2 numbers. That was 1 for our 59, gives us 51. Bring a 0 down. How many times does 59 go into 510? So 67, 8? It's 8, right? 8. 72, 44, 72. Now we have to subtract these 2 numbers, which is 38. And this was 8 up here. Now we have to bring down the 0 if we want to be a little more accurate. 59, how many times does 59 go into 380? So that's 6. Is that right? 54. 5, 60, 35. Okay, that's right, 6. So we finally have our answer, 11.8%. Rounded up to 11.9%. And we have our answer. Jake, what do you think? Jake is severely unhappy. I do not do this. This is not the way I do it, and that's why I have an alternative method, which is the purpose of this video, to show you how I do this. Now, I'm going to do this, my method, not going to show you, that's the whole rest of this video, but I'm going to do it in my head real quick just to show you. So I have two numbers, 7 and 59. I'm going to convert this into a percentage. So I've got to do this in my head, so it's a little silent here. I'm going to take 7, comes a new number for me, 5, and then I'm going to adjust that. So that gives me 11.6. Okay, so 11.6% to 11.7% is my estimate using my method, which took me about 10 seconds to do. Really close. I mean, this is really close. And keep in mind that the 8, 9, 12 rule isn't exactly perfect. So if I can do this in about 10 seconds, and I don't have to do this, I'm going to do it. And keep in mind, when you're playing live backgammon, there's no sheet of paper you can use, and you can't use a pen. You have to be able to do this in your head, and that's not fun. So let's get started on my method. There are 3 steps that I use. I do what I call completing the apple pie, then I'll add or subtract, if necessary, 10%, and then at the end, if I need to, I'll make some small adjustments. Now the good news is that often you'll only need 2 or even only 1 of these to get your answer. Let me show you the first 2. Now this is what I call completing the apple pie. You have an apple pie and someone has eaten half of it. I don't know who would do something like this, but I do have my suspicion. So we have a half apple pie, or 50%, but we like the numbers 10 and 100. We want this 50 to be 100. And how do we make 50 100? We multiply by 2. So we're doubling what was left. In this case, someone ate 1/3 of your apple pie. How do we make it whole again? So we have 2/3 of an apple pie left, or about 66%, if you want to look at it as a percentage. What do we have to do to make it whole again? We're going to add half of what was left. It's half of what was left to get to 100. So plus 1/2. And these represent our method. So in this case we have apple pie, someone ate 1/4 of it. How do we make it whole again? So there's 3/4, 75%, and we're going to take 1/3 of what is left, add it to it, and that gets us to 100. So we're going to add 1/3. And that's the basics of an apple pie. The idea of this is that you have a visualization. We're trying not to avoid numbers, we're trying to avoid math when we can, and this visualization of what we have to do to get to the number 100 is very, very useful. Now let's look at part 2, which is 10%. So 10% is easy. 10 is a great number, 100 is a great number, and that's why I constantly go back to them and use them. What is 10% of 100? 10. What is 10% of 90? 9. What is 10% of 15? 1.5. All we have to do is just grab that number. We're just moving a decimal over to get to our answer. What is 10% of 8? 0.8. What is 10% of 12? 1.2. Super easy. But what I said is, what we're going to do is add or subtract 10%. So, if you have the number 7, and we're going to add 10%. 0.7s are 10%, so the answer is 7.7. So if you had 7%, you're working on your pip count, you're going to add 10%, now we're at 7.7, we're just under 8%, and that's where all this is going. Just a few quick more examples. 10 plus 10%. 10% of that, of 10, would be 1, so our answer is 11. What is 11 minus 10%? 10% of 11 is 1.1, so 11 minus 1.1 would be 9.9. What is 9 minus 10%? Your 10% would be 0.9, so your answer is 8.1. And that's it for 10%, keeping it as simple as possible. So we have our apple pie, we have our 10%. What are we actually doing with this? What good does this do us? Well, if you remember our fun example here, where we had 7 pip lead and 59 on our pip count, and we did this to get our answer. Now, it did give us the answer, but what does this actually represent? And what this is, it's a fraction, 7 over 59. Now, our answer on this was 11.9. That's our answer when we do the math. This is the same number. So, what effectively happened was we took our 59, which is our pip count, and we stretched it. We made it 100. And if we use the same technique to take the 59 to 100, if we do that to our top number, 7, it takes us right to our answer. And whenever we do this, whenever we take a fraction and we take that number to 100, we're done, because that becomes our answer. And at that point, we take this and we get rid of it, because we're replacing all this complicated math with a shortcut. Our shortcut gets us to 100, and we have our answer. So now I'm going to go through every pip count and every pip lead and show you how I use this. So there's going to be a lot of examples. And then after that, after the examples, I'll show you the third step, which is where we sometimes need to make some small adjustments. So let's get started. So let's do our first pip count, the easiest of all. We have a pip count of 100. We have a race lead of 6%. That's why we like the number 100. There's nothing to do. We have a race lead of 7%. Race lead of 8%. Race lead of 9%. Race lead of 13%. Nothing to do. But this one's important because our target for this method is the number 100. Let's do the next one. Our pip count is 50. How do we turn 50 into 100? Times 2. So that's an easy one. So we have a pip lead of 2. 2 times 2 is 4. There's our percentage. Pip lead of 3, when our pip count is 50, times 2, 6%. Pip lead of 4, 8%. Pip lead of 5, 10%. And a pip lead of 6, 12%. Super easy. Now we have a pip count of 25. To get to 100, times 4. Again, this is all the apple pie. We're just figuring out how to get to 100. Pip lead is 2. 2 times 4, 8%. Pip lead of 3 times 4, 12%. Pip lead of 4 times 4, 16%. Not too many to do when your pip count is that low. Our next one, we have a pip count of 90. Now how do we get to 100? We're going to add 10%. Remember that part 2? Adding and subtracting 10%? Here's where it comes in. Adding 10%, it gets us to 99. It doesn't get us to 100. That's close enough. It's more than close enough. So we have a pip lead with our pip count at 90. Of 5 plus 10%, 5.5%. Pip lead of 6 plus 10%, that's our method, 6.6%. Pip lead of 7, our pip count's 90, 7.7%. Pip count of 8, 0.8's our 10%, 8.8%. Look how fast we're doing this math. Next one. We have a pip count of 110. Our target's 100. We're going to minus 10%. So we have a pip count of 100. We're going to subtract 10%. So we have a pip count of pip lead of 7. We're going to subtract 10%. So we're going to subtract 0.7, 6.3%. Easy. Pip lead of 8 minus 10% brings us to 7.2%. Pip lead of 9, 0.9 gives us 8.1%. Pip lead of 10 minus 10%, 9%. And you can continue with these numbers. Our next one. Now the numbers get a little more fun, but still easy. We have a pip count of 45. So, what are our target numbers? We know that 90 is easy, 100 is great if we get to it, and 110. We now have 3. If we get to 100, we got it. If we get to 90 or 110, we're just going to adjust by 10%. So for our pip count of 45, times 2 gets us to 90. So for 45, it's very easy to use 90. So you have a race lead of 2 and a pip count of 45. We're going to double that to 4. We're at 90, so we have to stretch our rubber band. We're going to add 10%, 4.4%. Pip lead of 3. We double it to 6. We add 10%, 6.6%. Look how quick we came up with that. If you're not using a shortcut, what you have to do is you have to do 3 divided by 45, and you have to go through all the steps. We're eliminating that. Your pip count's 45. Race lead of 4. We're going to double it to 8. We're going to add 10%, 8.8%. This initial cube, we're within our window, 8.8%, very easy cube. Pip count is 5. With our pip lead is 5, pip count is 45. We're going to double it to 10. We're going to add 10%, 11%. Pip count's 45. Our pip lead is 6. We're going to double it to 12. We're going to add 10%, 13.2%. Super fast. Next one we're going to do, our pip count is 55. Our targets are 90, 100, and 110. 100 is nice, but isn't going to work for us. Times 2, yep, gets us to one of our targets, 110. So we're going to multiply by 2. We're going to subtract 10%. So we have a pip count of 3, pip lead of 3, converting that to a percentage. Multiply it by 2, subtract 10%, 5.4%. Pip lead of 4, we're going to double that to 8. We're going to subtract 10%. As a percentage, this is 7.2%. Leading by 5 pips. We're going to double it to 10. We're going to subtract 10%. 9%. Our pip lead is 6. We're going to double it. We're going to subtract 10%, 1.2, gives us 10.8%. Pip lead of 7. We're going to double it, and we're going to subtract 10%, brings us to 12.6%. Super easy. Next one we're going to look at. We have a pip count of 30. Our targets are 90, 100, 110. 100 is great. 90 and 110 work for us. 90 works. Times 3, we're going to have to add 10%. So we have a pip lead of 2. We're going to multiply that by 3, and we're going to add 10%. 6.6%. We have a pip lead of 3. Times 3 is 9. We're going to add 10%. 9.9%. Pip lead of 4. Multiplied by 3 is 12. We're going to add our 10%. 13.2%. And again, when your pip count is low, there's not going to be very many. It can get you in and out of that window very quickly. Our next example, our pip count is 60. Our targets are 90, 100, 110. 90 is easiest for this one. We're going to add 1/2. 60 plus 30 is 90. Stretch our rubber bands. We're going to do 10%, adding 10%. So we have a pip count of 4, pip lead rather, of 4. And a pip count of 60. We're going to add 1/2. So 2 is 1/2, so that brings us to 6. And we're going to add 10%. 6.6%. We have a pip lead of 5. We're going to add 1/2, takes us to 7.5, and we're going to add 10%. A few of these, you have to pause a little, but almost all of these are super simple. So this is, what is this? 8.25%. We have a pip lead of 6. We're going to add 1/2. 1/2 is 3, so that brings us to 9. We're going to add 10%, 9.9%. Pip lead of 7, pip count 60. We're going to add 1/2, so that gets us 10.5. We're going to add 10%, so that's 1.05. So that's 11.6%. 11.5, I just rounded up. It is 2 steps. A few of these will be a little tricky, but the idea here is that 5 divided by 60, 7 divided by 60, do you really want to do it the long way when you have a shortcut like this? Next one we're going to look at, we have a pip count of 80. Our targets are 90, 100, and 110. Well, 80 is right there. So we're going to add 1/4. Gets us right to 100, right where we want to be. So you have a pip count of 5. Not always going to be easy. Pip count of 5, we're going to add 1/4 of 5. 1.25. 6.25%. Pip count of 6, we're going to add 1/4. So that would be 1.5. 7.5%. Pip count of 7, we're going to add 1/4. 8 would be 2, so this is a little less than 2. So 1.75? 8.75. Is that right? I'm not even going to take the time to double check. It's well over 8. Again, these are quick approximations when you need them to be. If you want to take a little extra few extra seconds to make sure it's spot on, you can do that. We have a pip count of 8, that's easy, but we'll do it the long way anyway here. 8 divided by 80 is 10%. We're going to add 1/4. 1/4 of 8 is 2. 10%. Pip lead of 9, we're going to add 1/4, which would be 2 1/4. Because 8 would be 2, we just have 1 to break up into fourths. Pip count is 11.25. Pip count is 10, we're going to add 1/4. 1/4 would be 2 1/2. 12.5 is our percentage. 80 is a pretty easy one. Next one we're going to look at, pip count of 40. Our targets are 90, 100, 110. Well, we just did 80, so we're just going to use 80. So we're going to multiply by 2, and then we're going to use the same technique we did with 80, which is plus 1/4. So if we had a pip lead of 2, when our pip count is 40, we multiply that by 2, which is 4. We're going to add 1/4 of that, 5%. Pip lead of 3, I'm going to multiply that by 2. We're going to add 1/4, which would be 1.5. Gives us 7.5%. Pip lead of 4, I'm going to multiply that by 2. Again, it's easy, that's a 10%, right? Multiply that by 2, which is 8. We're going to add 1/4 of the 8, which is 2. 10%. Pip lead of 5. We're going to multiply that by 2. We're going to add 1/4, which is 2.5. 12.5%. 40 and 80, they work the same. Next one we do, let's do a pip count of 65. Pip count is 65. Our targets are 90, 100, 110. 66 is about 2/3. This is only off by 1. Now, if you remember, when we have 2/3, we're going to add half of what's left. So all we have to do is add 1/2. This one's fun. This one's super easy. So we have a pip lead of 4. We're going to add half of that, plus 2. 6%. 5. We're going to add half of it. This gets us right to 100. 7.5%. Pip lead of 6 with this pip count. We're going to add half. 9%. Pip lead of 7. We're going to add half. 3.5. 10.5%. And pip lead of 8. We're going to add half. 12%. Anything really close to 65, 66, super easy. Just add half. Next one we're going to look at, pip count, 75. Our targets, 90, 100, 110. $75. We're going to add 1/3. We're going to take 1/3 of what's left and add it. Pretty straightforward. So we have a pip count of 5. Let's do 5. It's a little clumsy, but we'll take a quick look at it. 1/3 of 6 would be 2, and this is a little less than 2, so less than 2. So 1.7 gives us 6.7%. That's not accurate, but it's accurate enough. It's well under 8. This is not a cube, using the 8, 9, 12 rule. Pip count of 6. 1/3 of 6 is 2. 8%. Super easy. Pip count of 7. 1/3 of 7. 6 is the closest number. So 2, but this is a little larger. So plus 2, we got that extra number. 2 1/3. So that gives us 9.3%. We have a pip lead of 8 when our pip count's 75. we're going to add 1/3. 9 is the closest, so plus 3, but this is a little less, so 2 point, what is it? Is that 2.3? And that gives us 10.3%, right in the middle of our 8, 9, 12 rule. So this isn't super accurate, but it's right there. We're so far in the middle, this is an easy double take. Our pip lead is 9 when our pip count is, these are our pip leads. When our pip count is 75, we're going to add 1/3. Super easy. Plus 3, 12%. You have a pip lead of 10. Well, we know that 9 is 12%. Whatever this number is, it's bigger than 12%. Super easy. Next one we're going to look at is a pip count of 70. These last few are the ones that are not quite as easy as the ones we've gone through so far, but we've eliminated almost all the available pip counts so far. Our targets are 90, 100, and 110. Well, half of 70 is 35, which takes us to 105. So plus 1/2. Pretty straightforward. Now we're 5% off. We're not 10% off, we're 5% off. So we can still use this. So let's do a pip count, a pip lead of 5. Now we're going to add half to that. Brings us to, that's 2.5, brings us to 7.5. Now we've overshot 100, so we're going to come back to 100. It's pretty easy to subtract 10%. It's pretty easy to find that number. It's 0.75. Let's just go with half of that, round number, 0.4. So we're going to subtract 0.4, 7.1%. So do you see what I did there? I used this method of subtracting 10%, but I just halved that number. Since we're at 105, we're halfway in between. And there's only a few of these where you have to think about it a little more, but even if you did 10%, you're still going to be surprisingly close to your answer. Pip count of 6, we're going to add a half, brings us to 9. If we subtracted 10%, we'd be subtracting 0.9. Half of that is 0.45. So 9 minus 0.45 is 8.55%. 7, we're going to add half, takes us to 10.5. And then we're going to subtract 5%. 10% would be 1.05, 1. So half of that is 0.5. So we're just going to subtract the 0.5, gets us to 10%. Well, we kind of knew that. 7 divided by 70 is 10%. But it's still good to practice the method. Pip count of 8, we're going to add half, brings us to 12. We're going to subtract, we're going to find our 10%, 1.2, half of that is 0.6, so we're going to subtract 0.6, brings us to 11.4%. Pip lead of 9, we're going to add half, which is 4.5, gives us 13.5. Now 10% of that would be 1.35. Let's just say 1.4 to make the math simple. We're going to do half, 0.7. Brings us to 12.8%. Now that one, if you did the long way, 9 divided by 70, that's going to take you a little bit of work. We did a quick estimate. We're over 12%. Check it with your calculator. We are very close to where we need to be for a quick, good estimate. So that's 70. Our next example, pip count, 35. Our target is 90, 100, and 110. Where is this going to get us? 35 times 3 is 105, but that should make sense because 35 times 2 is 70. So now for 35, we're going to do the same thing we did with 70, except to get the start, we're going to do times 3. So 105 is right there, so we're going to subtract 5%. So if we have a pip count of 2, we're going to multiply that by 3 is 6. Okay, we're already there at the answer, right? Because we're now going to subtract, because we're 105, we overshot our 100 and we're coming back. So whatever this number is, it's less than 6%. I don't need an answer more accurate than that. Pip lead rather. Pip lead is 3. Our pip count is 35. Multiply by 3, 9. And we're going to subtract 5%. So 10% would be 0.9. Half of that, 0.45. 9 minus 0.45 is 8.55%. Our pip lead of 4, multiply that by 3 is 12. We're going to subtract our 5%. 10% would be 1.2. There's our 5%, 11.4%. What if our pip lead was 5? Multiply that by 3 gives us 15. Wow, that's a big number. And if we're only minusing 5%, we are so far above 12%. We don't need an accurate number. It should be an easy double pass. And our last one, which is a pip count of 85. Now our targets are 90, 100, and 110. We're really close to 90. It's only 5 away. But we're a little bit short because to get to 100, we're gonna add another 10%. So what I like to do with 85, it's probably the more difficult of all the different ones. Some of them, as you saw, were super easy. What I just do is I just do plus 5% and then a little more. So I'm doing kind of like a plus 5% plus a few percent. This is an estimation. So if I have a race lead of 5, I'm going to add 5% to that. 10% would be 0.5, so half of that is 0.25. So it gives us a number of 5.25, and I'm just going to add a little. Adding a little doesn't get us anywhere near 8%. This is well below 8%. If I wanted to add a little bit to this, I would just add a few percentage. I would just call this 5.6 or something like that. It's just an estimate. If we had a pip lead of 6 into 85, we're going to add 5%. 10% would be 0.6. Half of that would be 0.3. So I'm going to go with 6.3%. And then I'm going to add a few percent to that. 6.7%. Just to add a little bit. Pip lead of 7, we're going to add 5%. 10% would be 7. And so half of that would be 0.35. So we have 7.35%. Now, this is getting close to 8. This one I want a more accurate answer on. So I'm going to add 10%. So 10% will be 0.735. We'll round it up to 7.4. Now this gives us 8.09%. See how I can choose when I want a more accurate answer, take a few extra seconds to do it. When the answer is well outside of that window, I know I don't have to do any more work on it. 85, pip count is 8. That's pretty close. It's going to be close to 10%, isn't it? So we're going to add 5% to that. 10% would be 0.8. 5% would be 0.4. Just going to have that. 8.4%. And then if we add 10%, we're going to be adding 8.4. So this becomes like a 9.2%, something like that. 9, we're going to add 5%. 10% would be 0.9. So 5% would be half of that, 4.5, gives us 9.45. Then we're going to add 10%. 10% is about 9.9, so that brings us to 10.3, 10.4%, etc. Let's do one more. 10. We're going to add 5%, 10.5. Add 5% rather. 10% will be 1, half of that would be 0.5. That brings us to 10.5. Let's add 10% to that. 10.5, and the 10% would be 1.5. That brings us to 11. That brings us to 12%. So those are our shortcuts. Some of them are super easy, some of them are so fast, and they give you an answer that's so easily a double take, or they're so far outside of our window of double take that our answer is very easy. Now the last thing we need to do is, on occasion, when we need to make a few small adjustments. Okay, so that is the method. Now I do want to apologize for going so fast. I wanted to be comprehensive and go through all the pip counts that I possibly could. And we went through a lot of them. And this is typically the range where you're going to be counting in a non-contact game. Where the bulk of what you really see when you have positions like this, your pip count's going to be more in this range, not so much on the high end or the low end. But I still wanted to go through them all, and I'm sure at the speed I went, I did make 1 or 2 mistakes. So you can comment if you find any mistakes. And if anyone has a even better way of doing 85, feel free to share. Now the last thing, and I'm sure some of you already have this question on your mind, what about the numbers that are in between? What about the numbers that don't line up perfectly? And that's part 3, where I mentioned that I do make some small adjustments. Now let's say that you have a pip count, like in this case, you have a pip count of 52. So your pip count is 52. So if we use 50, our answer is going to be a little off. If we use 55, our answer is going to be a little off, but it'll be close. So if you use 50, you can use 50. What is your position compared to 50? Your position's a little worse. Your pip count's a little higher. So what you do is you use 50, do everything like you normally would, get your percentage, but your position isn't as strong as it would be if your pip count was actually 50. So what you're going to do is you're going to downgrade your answer. You're going to reduce your pip lead by just a little bit. Now if you used, instead for this case, 52 is your pip count, and you used 55, your position is stronger than 55 because your pip count is less. So you use the method for 55, get your percentage, but your position is stronger than your answer. So then you're going to increase. You're going to increase your pip lead percentage. If you use 50, you're going to, you use 50, you're going to downgrade your percentage. Use 55, you're going to upgrade. And basically, you're putting 52 here, and you're saying, my position's a little worse than 50, so my answer is going to be a little less if I had used 50, and my position's better than 55, so if I use 55 for my method, then I'm going to upgrade my pip percentage just by a little bit. This is really even a backgammon thing, just like the math isn't. It's just sort of a common sense thing that you can do. But that way, we have all of these. Most of these are super easy. You can take any number in here, and it's very close to one of these that are very easy, and then you just make the adjustment. And you can experiment with this. You can put up random positions, do the pip count, do a quick estimate using the method, whatever method you want to use, and then pull out your calculator and see how close you got. So the last thing we're going to do now is just prep you for the next video. We're going to see, what about these gaps? What about these overstacked points? I'd mentioned that previously. We're going to do that in the next video, and that's going to allow us to do yet another small adjustment on our 8, 9, 12 to be a little more accurate, and it's also going to introduce us to the Keith count. So that's going to wrap that up, and in the next video, our final adjustments and the introduction to the Keith count.